The morning in Vatican City began like any other, with bells ringing softly in the distance and the sound of tourists filling the narrow streets. People lined up to see the grand St. Peter's Basilica, some holding cameras, others carrying small prayer books in their hands. But on this day, something unusual was about to happen, something that would draw the attention of not only those standing in the square, but also millions of people across the world who were watching their television screens. A major news channel had announced a live interview with one of the Swiss guards. The men known for their colorful uniforms, loyalty, and silence, the Swiss guards were not like other soldiers. They were protectors of the Pope, trained in discipline and faith, and they rarely spoke to the public about the private life inside the Vatican. For centuries, they had been seen as silent shadows, standing guard with serious faces, never breaking their duty. That was why this interview was so rare, almost unheard of. People wanted to know what could be so important that a guard had been allowed to speak. The guard chosen for the interview stood tall in his striking uniform of blue, red and yellow stripes, the same design that had been worn for centuries. His polished helmet gleamed under the light, but his face was calm, serious, and a little nervous. He was not a politician, not a priest, not someone used to being in front of cameras. He was simply a man trained to stand watch and protect. Yet today, he was about to share his own experience of the newest pope, Robert Prevost. Inside the studio, the air was filled with both excitement and respect. The interviewer, a well-known journalist, welcomed viewers and explained that this would not be a normal interview. This was a chance to hear, directly from the eyes of a witness, what it was like to see a pope rise from the election in the Sistine Chapel. This was not an official Vatican statement. This was a personal account, spoken by someone who lived close to history every single day. As the cameras focused on the guard, millions of people sat in their homes, in cafes and airports, waiting to hear his words. Some were devout Catholics, eager for every detail about the new leader of the church. Others were simply curious, wondering what kind of man Robert Prevost really was. Could this new pope carry the heavy responsibility of guiding the faithful across the globe? Could he bring peace and hope in a world filled with division? The guard adjusted his position, placed his hands firmly on his knees, and nodded. He was ready. His eyes carried both nervousness and honesty, as if he understood that his words would carry beyond the walls of the studio, echoing into homes and hearts far away. The interviewer leaned in gently and asked the first question. What was it like during the election of Pope Robert Prevost? The guard took a deep breath before answering. He explained that the atmosphere inside the Sistine Chapel had been heavy with silence. The cardinals had gathered, their faces serious, their voices low. Outside, crowds had filled the square, waiting for the white smoke to rise, waiting for the signal that a new pope had been chosen. Inside, however, time seemed to move slowly. Every sound, every prayer felt like it carried the weight of the world. He said that during those days of election, he often watched Cardinal Robert Prevost walk quietly through the halls. The cardinal never seemed rushed, never seemed eager for power. Instead, he moved with a calmness that stood out. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried kindness and thought. The guard shared that even before the final vote was announced, something about Prevost felt different. It was not in his ambition or his voice, but in the way he carried himself, as a man who would rather serve than be served. The interviewer listened closely, giving space for the guard to continue. What did you feel in that moment? He asked. The guard admitted that he was only a silent observer, but in his heart he had sensed that Robert Prevost might be the one chosen. He explained that sometimes it is not about what a man says, but how he lives. Prevost seemed to shine quietly without trying. There was no grand gesture, no loud promises, just a steady presence that made others take notice. As he spoke, the viewers watching from their homes could almost imagine themselves inside the chapel, feeling the stillness, the tension, the prayers rising in the air. The guard's voice was not dramatic, yet it carried weight because it was so honest. He was not a storyteller by trade, but the truth in his words made the story alive. The interviewer asked him about the moment the announcement was finally made, the moment when Cardinal Prevost became Pope Robert. The guard's eyes softened as he remembered. He described hearing the words spoken, seeing the new pope step forward, and noticing that instead of pride, there was humility written on his face. He did not lift his chin high or wave as if celebrating. Instead, he lowered his head, as though he knew the responsibility placed upon him was greater than any man could carry alone. The guard paused for a moment, and then added something personal. He said that in that instant, as the new pope raised his hand to bless those gathered, he felt a chill run through him. It was not fear or doubt, but a deep awareness that he was standing in the presence of a leader chosen not just by men, but by faith. The studio grew silent after his words. Even the interviewer, known for his quick questions and polished manner, allowed the pause to stretch. The audience watching at home leaned forward, caught in the quiet power of the guard's memory. The guard then explained why he had agreed to this unusual interview. He said that many people see the Vatican only through official ceremonies or news reports, but very few know what happens in the simple everyday moments. He wanted the world to understand that the new pope was not just a symbol or a title, but a man, humble, steady, and deeply caring. As the first part of the interview closed, the guard's story painted a picture that no camera could capture. It was not about politics, not about power, but about the human heart of a man stepping into one of the most important roles in the world. And as the lights dimmed for a break, millions of people watching felt as though they had been given a secret glimpse behind the great walls of the Vatican, a glimpse they would not forget. The interview moved into its second part, and by now the guard's voice had already captured the attention of millions. His first words had been simple, yet they carried a kind of quiet power that made people lean closer. The interviewer, sensing the deep interest of the viewers, asked another thoughtful question. During those tense days in the Sistine Chapel, when the cardinals were choosing the new pope, what did you notice about Cardinal Robert Prevost that others may not have seen? The guard paused for a moment before speaking. He explained that being a Swiss guard meant standing silently in corners, halls, and courtyards, watching over the men of the church without ever interfering. He was not part of their discussions, nor was he allowed to know the private details of the election. Yet, he said, silence often allowed him to see what others missed. He remembered how the cardinals entered the chapel each morning with serious faces, holding the weight of the church on their shoulders. Some looked worried, some looked tired, and others looked deep in thought. In the middle of this, Cardinal Robert Prevost always carried himself with a calmness that was almost unusual. The guard described how Prevost would bow his head slightly as he walked past, greeting those around him with a nod or a gentle smile, even when no one seemed to notice. He was not trying to stand out, the guard said softly. He was not seeking attention. But his presence was steady and you could feel peace in the way he moved. The interviewer leaned forward. Do you mean you already felt he might be chosen before the vote? The guard thought carefully before answering. He said he did not know for certain, because no man could predict the outcome of such a sacred process. But something inside him whispered that Cardinal Prevost carried a spirit of service, not ambition. And often, he explained, that is what people recognize in a true leader. The viewers watching at home could imagine the scene through the guard's words. They pictured the solemn chapel with its painted ceilings, the long hours of silence and prayer, and among it all, a man who walked with quiet dignity, not seeking glory but offering presence. The guard then shared a moment that stayed with him. One evening, as the long day of voting had ended and the cardinals were leaving the chapel, a group of young priests were carrying books and materials across the hall. One of the books slipped and fell to the ground. Without hesitation, Cardinal Prevost bent down to pick it up, smiling warmly at the priest as he handed it back. It was a simple act, something anyone could have done, but the guard noticed that most men in such a position would have allowed someone else to handle it. Instead, Prevost acted naturally as though kindness was his habit. The interviewer smiled at the story. It seems these small things made an impression on you. Yes, the guard replied, because sometimes small actions tell you more than big speeches. He went on to explain how, during the meals in those days, Cardinal Prevost would always take a seat among others instead of choosing a place that gave him importance. He would listen quietly, not interrupting, and when asked for his opinion, he spoke with gentle words, never loud, never demanding. The guard admitted that he admired this because it showed humility, a quality that often carries more weight than authority. The interviewer then asked about the atmosphere outside the chapel, where crowds of people were waiting for the white smoke. The guard's face grew serious as he described it. He said the square was filled with people from all over the world. Some held candles, others sang softly, and many prayed. The tension was heavy because everyone knew that soon, a new pope would be named and history would change again. Inside, however, the silence was deeper. The guard explained that silence inside the Sistine Chapel was not empty. It was filled with prayers, with hope, with fear, and with the sense that something greater than human choice was taking place. You could almost hear hearts beating, he said, his voice low. That is how heavy the moment felt. As the guard spoke, viewers could imagine themselves standing there, seeing the flickering candles outside, hearing the rustle of robes inside, and sensing the mixture of nerves and faith all around. His words painted the kind of picture that no camera could fully capture. The interviewer asked, "And how did you personally feel standing there, knowing you were witnessing something the whole world was waiting for?" The guard hesitated. He admitted that though he was trained to be disciplined, he could not ignore the feeling of awe. He said he often reminded himself that he was only a servant, a protector, not a leader. Yet even in his simple duty, he felt the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. "I thought of my family," he said, "and how one day I would tell them that I was there when Robert Prevost was chosen. Not as a politician, not as a celebrity, but as a shepherd for the people." The interviewer allowed his words to rest in the air, then gently asked, "Do you believe the world has found the right man?" The guard lifted his eyes, steady and sure. "I cannot speak for the world," he said, "but I can say that when I saw him bow his head and step forward as Pope Robert Prevost, I felt peace. And peace is a sign that you are in the presence of something true." The studio grew quiet for a moment, and even those watching from their homes could feel the weight of his statement. The guard then shared one more reflection. He explained that in those moments he realized that leadership is not about being the loudest or the most powerful. It is about serving without asking for recognition. He said that Cardinal Prevost reminded him of a shepherd watching over his flock, guiding with patience rather than force. The interviewer, touched by the honesty, thanked the guard for his openness. And as the cameras prepared to move into the next part of the interview, the audience felt as though they had been transported into the very heart of the Vatican, standing beside the guard, watching history unfold not through news headlines, but through the quiet eyes of someone who had seen it firsthand. It was clear that this interview was not just about facts. It was about feelings, about the small and unseen details that shape the truth of a person. And as the guard sat silently once more, waiting for the next question, the viewers knew that what they had just heard was not only a report, but a testimony of faith and humility. The cameras returned after a short break, and the interviewer leaned closer with a smile. He could see that the viewers were hooked, not because of drama, but because of the guard's simple honesty. In a world where most interviews were filled with big words and carefully prepared speeches, this one felt different. It was a rare chance to hear from someone who stood so close to the Pope yet spoke with the heart of an ordinary man. The next question touched a deeper point. "You have shared what it was like during the election," the interviewer said. "But what about after? What was it like in the first days of Pope Robert Prevost's leadership? What did you see that the rest of the world did not?" The guard's eyes softened and a small smile crossed his face. He said that after the excitement of the white smoke and the announcement, life inside the Vatican did not immediately return to normal. Everything felt new yet strangely calm. The staff, the priests, the other guards, all of them were curious about what the new pope would be like in daily life. They had seen popes before, but each man who carried the title was different. Some were very formal, others were simple, some were strict, others were warm. Everyone wondered which kind Pope Robert Prevost would be. The guard leaned forward slightly and began to tell a story. On the very first morning after his election, instead of staying in private rooms, Pope Prevost walked out early into the courtyard. The guards who were on duty were surprised to see him so soon. They expected him to remain inside, meeting with cardinals and advisors. But instead he walked directly to the guards, greeted them one by one, and even asked for their names. The guard chuckled gently as he remembered how some of the younger guards froze, not knowing how to answer. "It was strange for us," he admitted, "because popes do not usually take time to ask the name of every guard." But he did. The interviewer nodded with interest. "So you felt he wanted to connect personally?" "Yes," the guard answered. "And it was not only with us. That same morning he visited the kitchen. He thanked the cooks who were preparing breakfast. He spoke to the cleaners who were quietly sweeping the halls. He even stopped to bless a gardener who was watering plants near the courtyard. These things may sound small, but for those people it was everything. To be seen, to be valued, it touched their hearts. The viewers watching at home could almost picture it. The new pope walking humbly among ordinary workers, smiling, shaking hands, speaking simple words of thanks. No cameras were there to capture those moments. But now the world was hearing about them from someone who had stood nearby. The guard then shared another moment that left him deeply moved. One afternoon, a group of families was visiting inside the Vatican. Among them was a little boy who suddenly began to cry loudly. His parents tried to comfort him, but the child could not stop. The guards and staff looked around, unsure of what to do. At that moment, Pope Prevost appeared. Instead of walking past, he stopped, knelt down on the floor, and gently spoke to the boy. He placed his hand on the child's shoulder and whispered something softly. Within moments, the boy stopped crying, staring up at the Pope with wide eyes. The whole room fell silent. The guard said he would never forget that scene. It was not planned, not performed for anyone, he explained. It was natural. He simply cared, and that is what makes him different. The interviewer's eyes widened slightly, impressed by the warmth of the story. That must have been powerful to witness. The guard nodded. He added that even the guards themselves, trained to remain serious and professional, felt their throats tighten with emotion. They had seen many important men walk through those halls, but very few paused to kneel before a child. He then described how Pope Prevost handled his meals. Unlike some leaders who preferred privacy or formality, the new pope insisted on eating with others. Sometimes he joined priests, sometimes workers, sometimes guards. He would laugh at simple jokes, ask about their families, and listen more than he spoke. The guard said this shocked many of them because they expected distance, but instead they found closeness. Did it change the feeling inside the Vatican? The interviewer asked. Yes, the guard replied firmly. It made everyone feel like they belonged. He does not make you feel small. He makes you feel seen. The viewers at home were touched by these words. In their own lives, many of them had longed for leaders who did not look down on them, but treated them as equals. Hearing that the Pope himself lived this way gave them hope. The guard continued with more examples. He recalled how, late one evening, the Pope noticed two guards standing for hours in the cold courtyard. Instead of passing by, he stopped and asked if they had eaten. When they admitted they had not yet taken their break, he called for food to be brought out for them. The guards were stunned, not only by the kindness but by the fact that the Pope himself cared about something so small. These are not things the public sees, the guard said, but for those of us who serve near him, it shows us who he truly is. The interviewer asked, "And how did these actions affect you personally?" The guard grew thoughtful. He said that standing watch day after day could sometimes feel invisible. Guards were trained to blend into the background, to protect without being noticed. But when the Pope took time to greet them, to thank them, to even remember their names, it gave them pride in their duty. It reminded us, he said softly, that our service is not just to protect walls, but to protect a man who values people. The viewers watching across the world could feel the sincerity in his voice. It was not a polished speech, but a heartfelt reflection. As the interviewer prepared to close that segment, he asked one last question. From what you have seen, what do these small actions tell you about the kind of leader Pope Robert Prevost will be? The guard took a deep breath and answered slowly. They tell me he will lead not by standing above us, but by walking with us. He is not a man of distance. He is a man of presence, and presence is what people need most. The studio grew quiet again. The interviewer thanked the guard for sharing such intimate stories, stories that revealed more than any headline could, and as the cameras cut away, viewers around the world felt something rare, a closeness to a pope they had never met, yet now felt they knew. The first days of Pope Robert Prevost's leadership had not been about grand speeches or ceremonies, but about small, genuine moments of love. And thanks to the honesty of one Swiss guard, the world now understood that sometimes the truest signs of greatness are found not in power, but in kindness. The interview entered its fourth part, and by now the audience was fully drawn into the Swiss guard's story. His calm voice, his careful words, and his honest heart made the world listen in silence. The interviewer knew the next question needed to reach deeper, into the changes happening inside the Vatican since the arrival of Pope Robert Prevost. He leaned forward and asked, From your position as a guard, what changes have you noticed since Pope Prevost became the leader of the church? How has he influenced the way people inside the Vatican live and work? The guard straightened in his seat, his expression thoughtful. He explained that the Vatican is more than grand walls and ceremonies. It is also a home filled with people who work, eat, pray, and serve every single day. Some are priests and bishops, but many are ordinary staff, gardeners, cooks, cleaners, secretaries, and guards like him. In the past, many of these people felt invisible, their work hidden behind the shine of ceremonies. But in the short time since Pope Prevost had taken his place, something began to shift. He does not separate himself from others, the guard said softly. He listens, he invites, he includes. And because of this, people inside these walls feel something they have not felt in many years: hope. The interviewer pressed gently. Can you give us an example? The guard nodded. He recalled a moment in one of the meeting halls where young priests were gathered. Usually, such meetings were very formal, with higher leaders speaking while younger men stayed quiet, only listening. But Pope Prevost surprised everyone by turning the meeting around. He asked the youngest priests to share their thoughts first. He wanted to hear their hopes, their struggles, even their criticisms. At first, many were shy, unsure if it was safe to speak openly. But the Pope encouraged them with gentle words. Your voice matters here. Speak freely. The guard described how the room slowly filled with brave voices. Priests spoke of their challenges in serving poor communities, of their fears about connecting with the younger generation, of their desire for guidance. Instead of dismissing their worries, the Pope wrote notes, asked questions, and listened with genuine attention. For those priests, the guard explained, it was the first time they felt truly heard. And for me, standing at the door, it was powerful to see. A leader who listens is a leader who inspires. The interviewer nodded, clearly moved by the story. So his way of leadership is not to command, but to invite? Yes, the guard said firmly. He invites others to walk with him. He does not rule with distance, but with closeness. The guard then told another story, one that touched many hearts. A fellow guard, worried about his sick mother back home, was standing at his post one evening when Pope Prevost passed by. The Pope noticed the guard's tired eyes and asked softly if something was troubling him. At first, the guard was hesitant to speak, but the Pope encouraged him to share. When he explained his mother's illness, the Pope placed his hand on the guard's shoulder and prayed with him, right there in the corridor. It was not a long prayer, but it was filled with sincerity. Later, the guard admitted he had never felt so supported in his life. This is how he changes us, the Swiss guard told the interviewer. He makes us believe that we are not alone. The viewers around the world could feel the weight of those words. In their own lives, many of them had felt unseen, unheard, or forgotten. Hearing that the Pope himself took time to comfort even a single guard in a hallway gave them hope that true kindness was still possible in leadership. The guard also spoke about how Pope Prevost chose humility over ceremony. He explained that often popes were expected to travel in grand cars or to be surrounded by heavy security. But Pope Prevost preferred walking among the people, even when it made others nervous. He believed that leadership meant being present, not hidden. He often reminded those around him that power without humility can harm, but power with humility can heal. The interviewer asked, "And how has this touched you personally?" The guard grew quiet for a moment before answering. He said that being a Swiss guard was not only a job of standing watch, it was also a job of sacrifice. Long hours, long distance from family, and constant discipline. Sometimes, he admitted, he felt like nothing more than a figure in a uniform, a shadow in the background. But when Pope Prevost stopped to greet him, when he asked about his life, when he remembered his name, the uniform suddenly felt like a badge of honor, not just duty. He makes you feel like your service has meaning, the guard explained. He shows us that even the smallest duty is valuable. The audience watching from their living rooms could feel the emotion in his voice. It was not about praise or attention, it was about dignity. The Pope gave dignity to people who had long served silently. The guard then revealed something even more surprising. He said that sometimes late at night, when the Vatican was quiet and the halls were empty, Pope Prevost would walk alone in prayer. He did not announce it, nor did he ask others to join. But guards on duty would notice him moving through the quiet halls, stopping at different corners, praying silently for the people he served. He prays for us, the guard said simply. And knowing that he prays for us makes us want to serve him even more faithfully. The interviewer's voice softened. It sounds like his presence has deeply changed the atmosphere inside the Vatican. Yes, the guard replied with conviction. Before, there was often distance between leaders and workers. Now there is closeness. Before, some felt afraid to speak. Now they feel safe. Before, people wondered if their work truly mattered. Now they know it does. He looked straight at the camera and added, "This is the gift he brings, not just to us, but to the whole world. He shows us that true strength is not found in pride, but in humility." The studio fell into a gentle silence after his words. The interviewer smiled and thanked the guard, acknowledging the depth of what he had shared. And across the world, viewers sat quietly, reflecting on the kind of leadership they longed for in their own lives. Leadership that did not command from above but walked side by side with those it served. The fourth part of the interview ended not with noise, but with a stillness that carried power. People watching knew they had just heard something rare, something real. And as the cameras prepared to move into the final part, the world leaned in closer, eager to hear what else this guard might reveal about the man now guiding the church with humility, compassion, and faith. The studio lights shone gently on the Swiss guard as the interviewer prepared for the last part of the conversation. By now, the world had already heard stories that they never expected. Small acts of kindness, quiet prayers in hidden halls, the way Pope Robert Prevost treated each person with dignity. Millions of viewers felt closer to the Pope through this guard's honest words than they ever had from official speeches or news headlines. Now it was time for the closing reflections, the most personal thoughts the guard had to share. The interviewer leaned forward and spoke softly. "You have told us about the election, the first days, and the changes within the Vatican. Before we close, I must ask, why did you agree to speak today? The Swiss guards are known for their silence. What made you feel this moment was important?" The guard took a deep breath. His hands rested firmly on his knees and his eyes held both courage and humility. "Yes," he said slowly. "We are trained to stand silent. Our duty is not to speak but to protect. Yet sometimes silence can hide the truth that people need to hear. Today I felt it was important to let the world know who this man truly is. Not the robes, not the title, not the ceremonies, but the person." He paused, then continued. "Many people only see a distant figure standing on balconies, blessing crowds. But I've seen him walking through halls, greeting cooks, kneeling beside children, comforting guards. These are the things that reveal the heart of a man. And I wanted the world to know that the Pope they now look to is not only a leader of the church, but a shepherd of people." The interviewer let the silence rest for a moment, knowing the guard's words carried more weight than any polished speech. Then he asked, "And what has he given you personally?" The guard's expression softened. "Hope," he answered quietly. "He has given me hope. Hope that kindness still exists in leadership. Hope that humility can guide power. Hope that even the smallest duty, like standing guard through the night, has meaning when done for someone who values it. I have served in these walls for years, but never before have I felt so proud to wear this uniform. Because now I do not only protect the Vatican, I protect a man who prays for me, who sees me, who cares for me." His voice grew stronger as he added, "That is why I speak today. Because the world deserves to know the truth." The viewers at home felt a lump in their throats. It was rare to hear such honesty from someone so close to power. Yet this honesty was simple, free of politics, free of self-interest. It was the testimony of a man who had seen greatness not in grand gestures but in small human acts. The interviewer, sensing the emotion, asked one final question. "What do you believe the world can expect from Pope Robert Prevost in the years ahead?" The guard looked directly into the camera, as if speaking not to the interviewer but to the people watching in their homes, churches, and communities across the world. The world can expect a man who will walk with them, not above them. A man who will listen, not only speak. A man who will choose humility when others choose pride. And a man who will remind us that leadership is not about power, but about service. He paused, then added with quiet conviction, "I cannot say what challenges will come. The world is heavy with problems and no leader can solve them all. But I can say this, if you meet Pope Robert Prevost, you will meet kindness. And kindness is stronger than power." The studio fell silent again. The interviewer, touched deeply, thanked the guard for his courage and sincerity. He reminded viewers that what they had heard was not a political statement, Not an official Vatican message, but the honest heart of a man who had stood close to history. The guard straightened his back and lifted his chin. He did not speak again, but his silence now carried a different meaning. It was not the silence of duty, but the silence of completion, as if he had given the world what it needed to hear. The cameras slowly pulled back, showing him in his bright uniform, sitting tall, eyes steady. The image felt powerful, an ordinary soldier revealing extraordinary truths. And as the screen faded, millions of people sat quietly in their homes reflecting on what they had just witnessed. Around the world, conversations began. Families spoke about the Pope's humility. Priests shared the story of the boy he comforted. Workers felt inspired by the way he thanked cooks and cleaners. Even people who were not part of the church found themselves moved by the simple message that leadership begins with seeing and valuing people. For the Swiss guard, the interview ended with a salute, his eyes filled with respect. He had broken his silence not for himself, but for the truth. And in doing so, he reminded the world that sometimes the most powerful stories come not from leaders themselves, but from those who serve quietly at their side. As the night fell over Vatican City, the bells rang softly again. The Pope walked through the quiet halls offering prayers no one else would hear. And somewhere nearby a guard stood tall at his post, proud and grateful, knowing that his words had carried across the world. The story of Pope Robert Prevost had only just begun. But thanks to the voice of one Swiss guard, people everywhere now carried a glimpse of hope in their hearts. Hope that kindness, humility, and faith could still guide the world.